Let's bow in prayer. Eternal God, your creative presence is at work each moment of each day, bringing life. Your eternal love is always seeking to draw us closer and closer to your heart. Help us to be open to your closeness each day. Help us to be open to you in a special way in these next few moments. May you be pleased to use my words, all of our thoughts, all of our meditations, that through them and in spite of them, we may be drawn closer to you and gain an added measure of your truth and of your love. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen. Before I completed my final year for ministry preparation at St. Andrew's College, I took a year and worked for what was then called the Alliance of the Youth and the Elderly, which was a non-profit organization with funding primarily from the province. And we were the early version of home care in Saskatoon. So the work we did as home workers was primarily cleaning houses, washing walls, doing windows, grass cutting, yard work, hedge trimming, so on. Some personal care, and also taking clients to appointments. And it was a rewarding and eye-opening job. I saw living conditions for many people in Saskatoon, from the very comfortable to the very, very poor. I met those who were very pleasant and those who were very unpleasant. I remember a woman, I thought she was old, but now I realize she was probably in her early 50s, who needed some assistance each morning in getting her son out of bed and helping him get dressed and have breakfast. Her son, if I remember correctly, was about 24 years of age. He had been a medic in the armed forces, I think, but he now experienced a severe case of MS. I believe it was MS, and he was almost completely paralyzed. And she had managed on her own for a long time to care for him, and then she had fallen and injured her back. And her son was a very tall young man, and he was too big for her to turn or get out of bed on her own to help him into the chair for the day and for breakfast. So I was sent there each morning for a while. And even though there was a level of deep suffering for her son, which had a very big impact on her life, she was positive, hopeful, pleasant, uncomplaining, and welcoming. Now, I also met other people who seemingly to me did not have the same level of hardship, who lived in homes that indicated a wealthier lifestyle, who had some physical issues that required legitimate help from us, but who always complained. They complained about the work we did, they complained about the neighbors, they complained about the world around them, they complained about life in general. Nothing was positive. There was little to no gratitude. Complaining was the order of the day. It was exhausting being around them. Now, sometimes we complain because our attitude towards the world is a negative one, like those folks. And regardless of circumstances, we don't trust others, we think only of our needs and concerns, we feel the world owes us something, and we aren't receiving it, or we're jealous of others' good fortune. But there are other times when we complain because bad things have happened to us, and it is unfair. And we are overwhelmed, we are afraid, worried, confused about what to do or where to go for help, though there are legitimate complaints. And our complaining in the face of life's hardships, injustices, suffering, and pain is worse if we think we're alone, if we think we're unloved, if we think we have no support, nowhere to go, no hope for the future. So in the face of life's hardships, in the face of life's injustices, in the face of life's sufferings, where do we look for help in moving out of hopelessness, moving out of destructive complaining, moving out of the pain of life-changing hardships? Well, I believe that two of the passages we read from our lectionary readings today are helpful in that regard. The two passages are Exodus 16 and Philippians chapter 1. The Exodus passage is about the complaining of the newly escaped Hebrew slaves of Egypt, who are trying to find their way in the wilderness, and they're hungry and they're afraid. The second passage is the letter to the Philippians, and Paul's current hardship of being in prison, facing the real possibility of execution. So what do we learn in these passages about complaining, facing our sufferings, and overcoming challenges of life? Well, I'll offer you three things today for your consideration. Firstly, I would suggest we learn that complaints about suffering, injustice, and hardship in life are legitimate. In Exodus, you see, we learn that God hears those complaints from Hebrew slaves, respects their feelings and expressions of complaining, responds not by ignoring or abandoning them, nor condemning them for complaining, but he gives them what they need, which is food. Often in faith circles, we'll say things like, well, I shouldn't complain. But it's not always true. There are times we shouldn't, but there's lots of times we can. Sometimes we need to complain about things that are wrong, that are unjust, that are hurtful. Sometimes complaining can be a good, healthy release of our frustrations and our hurts. I've told you the story before, a long time ago, but I remember an incident happened to me a few years ago. And at that time, I curled on the Tuesday afternoon league in the Priestful rank here. And the game was over, and I purchased a can of Coke. But before I opened it, someone I knew came into the rink, and seemingly a bit rattled. And I asked what was going on. Well, her car had just slid on the ice around the corner, hit a snowbank, got stuck. I can't remember if there was a little damage or not. And she had come in to wait for the tow truck. And then she went on telling me that her husband was in the hospital. That was the reason she was driving. She was trying to get up there to visit him. And then she went on to describe a third unrelated issue that I can't remember now, that she was dealing with, causing her much frustration and much stress. And I responded really without thinking. I said, oh, I'm so sorry, that's a lot to deal with. And I held out my hand and said, would you like my Coke? Would you like my pop? And she laughed, and we both laughed at how silly that was. But later she sent me a note, mailed me a note thanking me for listening and for the offer of that can of pop. It had been just the kind of thing that had relieved her stress at that moment. You see, it was not the can of pop that mattered. It was that someone listened, even if no solution was possible. Complaining out loud in a safe place had been helpful in itself. Complaining can be helpful in the right circumstance, as long as we don't become trapped by complaining and are never able to move beyond complaining. Secondly, today, the passages tell us where to look for God's presence, comfort, healing, encouragement, and strength in order to face, endure, and overcome the hardships, injustices, and sufferings that life throws at us. So in Exodus, the people complain to Moses about the lack of food. They are hungry, and they don't know how to survive in the wilderness. They've never lived there before. Their complaining is legitimate. Now, sometimes our complaining is needed in bigger issues. Think about it. Complaining about residential schools, complaining about bullying, complaining about lack of access to health care, complaining about injustice in society. If the complaining is well done, if it is directed to others with the view to righting injustice, to overcoming wrongs, to fixing problems and hardships, well, that kind of complaining is always helpful, even if sometimes it's difficult to do or difficult to hear. So the challenge is not to remain trapped in complaining only and miss seeing the opportunities to find solutions, to find relief, and the power to overcome or move beyond life's hardships. For people of faith, we are called in the midst of hardships, injustices, and sufferings in life to trust that God is present with us, and we are never alone. And so, in the story today, God shows God's closeness with the people by providing food. And in this case, it will be manna, bread from heaven, and quails. Now, while the Israelites described the gift of food, manna, and quail as a miracle, we need to understand that the miracle, which means it answered their legitimate need, the miracle was a gift that already existed in God's creation. Biblical scholars tell us that manna is a sticky substance, high in carbohydrates, that forms on the trees in that part of the world, even today, and it falls off the trees with the rising sun. That's what they were able to pick up. They also tell us that the winds in the Mediterranean Sea will sometimes blow birds like quails onto the land while they're migrating, and they fall exhausted on the ground from the wind, just like they fell into the camp long ago. So scholars are telling us that through the natural world of God's creation, God provided the needed food in the Israelites' time of hunger and fear. For the Israelites, they had to learn to trust, to look, to learn, and to receive with gratitude the blessings of God, which was already around them, waiting to help them. Where are the places in your life that offer you what you need in the face of hardships, sufferings, and challenges of life? Who are the people and where are they? Who and where are the resources that will help you move forward in life? notice. When we ask God in faith to help by opening our eyes and hearts to God's blessings, then we may just find that there is help, support, even answers right near us, right around us, all the time. We simply need to receive and embrace those gifts, like the complaining Israelites suddenly had eyes open to embrace the blessings of manna and quail that God gave to answer their hunger. Thirdly, the passages show us that we have choices in the midst of life's hardships. One choice is to remain trapped and hopeless in complaining and lamenting what has gone wrong, like the Israelites were tempted to do. Another choice is to choose to live in the face of changed circumstances by embracing a vision of a life of love, compassion, and gratitude, as Paul will show us in the letter to the Philippines. So in Philippians, we have a letter from Paul to one of his most beloved congregations, the Christians at Philippi. And he loves them, he trusts them, he appreciates them, and he misses them. However, as he writes, he is separated from them because he's in prison. Now we can tell that Paul is tired from his imprisonment, even discouraged, because he talks about his longing to be free and to be with Christ. In other words, to die and have life and its hardships over, and instead be in the liberating embrace of Christ's resurrection love. But then he goes on quickly and says, but on the other hand, he feels a need and a desire to live for Christ so that he can continue to help the Philippians. In verses 21 and 26, listen to it again. For me, living is Christ and dying is gain, he says. If I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me, and I do not know which I prefer. I'm hard-pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary for you. Since I'm convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with all of you for your progress and joy in faith, so that I may share abundantly in your boasting about Christ Jesus when I come to you again. You see, Paul shows us that even though whether he lived or died physically was really dependent on his jailers and the Roman legal system, emotionally he had to decide whether he was preparing to die or whether he was preparing to live. And he decided to live, to find purpose in life. And part of his purpose was he was living for someone else. He was offering support and love for the Philippians, whom he loved, and he would do that even in prison. Now, in my home care days, I saw people facing many of life's unfair, difficult circumstances. And the people I remember particularly were the ones who found purpose in the face of life's challenges. And they exhibited often a peace, a strength, a joy, a determination that did not cause me as a worker to ever feel sorry for them. I never felt sorry for any of those clients. But instead, I admired, respected, and was energized by them. Such was the power of their faith, their love, their hope, and their purpose they found in life no matter what circumstance they were in. Paul in Philippians and the Hebrew people in Exodus today show us that with God's strengthening love, with eyes wide open to see God's help available in the ordinary place of life, and with the spiritual and practical decision to live for others with meaning, purpose, and joy, blessings can still be found. And finally, these passages also teach us that God can bring blessing to us and others in difficult circumstances. For Paul says, for example, that even in prison, God has made use of the injustice and hardship in life to bring blessing. Here his words again in verses 12 to 14. He says, what has happened to me has actually helped to spread the gospel, so that it has become known through the whole imperial guard and to everyone else that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers and sisters, having been made confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, dare to speak the word with greater boldness and without fear. In response to the scriptures today, may we learn to complain when it's helpful. May we learn to move beyond complaining and discover hope, faith, and determination to live well by loving others. And may we open our eyes to God's closeness, embracing the reality of the helps and supports that surround us, and allow God to strengthen us May we allow God to bless us and others, even in the midst of life's sometimes difficult circumstances. Amen.